Hello friends, clients, and fellow financial advisors. My name is Ron Bullis and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Lifeworks Advisors. My guest on today's episode of The Future of Advice is the Director of Institutional Asset Management at Ritholtz Wealth Management. He's been in the institutional asset management space for most of his career and was part of a portfolio management team for a large nonprofit managing their endowment. He's been named to the Investment Advisors 40 Under 40. He has 4 published books on investing and wealth management. And you can listen to his award-winning podcast, Animal Spirits with Michael and Ben, every Wednesday. I've been looking forward to this conversation now for some time because I believe that a big part of winning the future of advice is going to be the content that we create both for our clients and those around us in our community. My guest and his team at Ritholtz Wealth Management are some of the best in the industry at creating content that's meaningful, relevant, and valued by clients and advisors. Welcome to the Future of Advice, Ben Carlson. I have been looking forward to this conversation for a while. Our Director of Digital Content, Skylar, follows you and all of your compadres from Ritholtz on Twitter and social media. And so I've been looking forward to this conversation. I'm going to assume that a lot of the people watching have seen your stuff, have read some of your publications because you've been publicized in everything from The Atlantic to CNBC to the Wall Street Journal. But for those that maybe aren't familiar with who Ben Carlson is, who Ritholtz Wealth Management, is, give us a brief intro, background, and your role at Ritholtz.
Yeah, I've worked in the institutional nonprofit space my whole career, and for some reason I started reading financial blogs probably in the aftermath of the financial crisis because I realized going into that and living through that, the stuff that I was getting from people just really wasn't very helpful to me to understand what was going on in the world, and it was still relatively early in my career and that whole period. And I found the voices that I was attracted to ended up being from these financial blogs, and it was these individuals that were writing on their own, and they weren't writing for a publication. And I really was drawn to that and started doing that for a number of years and found these guys. Josh Brown is writing at The Reform Broker, and Barry Ritholtz has actually been writing since 1999 at The Big Picture. And the way that these guys were talking about the world of investing and the markets, it just resonated with me and made sense. So a number of years later, I kind of thought, well, I'm going to try my hand at this, and started writing myself while I was working in the nonprofit world. And through that blog, got to know a few people in the industry and a few people in the financial blogging world. And it was like, well, we kind of have similar interests, and through social media, got to meet up with them. And it turned out I got to meet Josh and Barry, who were like 2 of my writing heroes at that time, a few years later after I started the blog. And that's kind of how eventually led to a job with them, which was not the intent at all when I started writing, but that's kind of sort of worked out to be. And we just had similar philosophy of looking at the markets and how you should work with clients the right way, and the stuff that we had learned in the past that we didn't want to do with people. So Ritholtz Wealth Management is an RIA, and when I joined the firm in 2015, we were pretty tiny. We had $140 million under assets, and I was the 5th or 6th employee, so we're relatively small. And the whole idea with us was we had a handful of people doing content and putting stuff out there, and we had people who would be attracted to that content, and they ended up trusting us because they had followed it for long enough. And they kind of said, well, if I can't find someone to manage my money for me, maybe you could do it since I've been reading you for a while, and I like what you put out. And everyone who didn't like it, obviously, they never came. So we realized that we could leverage that trust with people following us, and eventually people would have life events, or they would have something in their family that they came into money, or whatever it was, that they would come to us, and we really sort of leaned into it. All of us started our blog separately at different places and kind of came from different backgrounds. Josh was working in the brokerage world. He was like in the old school boiler rooms. Barry was a strategist. Michael, our head of research, was from life insurance. I came from the nonprofit side, but we all had kind of a similar bent and values system. Then we brought in someone to sort of help on the wealth management side, since most of the stuff we were writing about was investing. And we just realized that leveraging content to help people not only bring in new clients, but also help communicate with existing clients worked. And I think it's worked out about as well as we could have ever expected. From having not set out to do this from the start, it just sort of something we kind of backed into. And then once we realized that it could actually be a business, and blogging and content could turn into a funnel of sorts, it just kind of took off from there.
And where are you guys at right now in terms of number of team members, assets under management?
Yeah, so we have over 40 employees now and headquartered in New York, but half of the employees work remotely. So we have people in California and Louisiana and Florida and Oregon and all over the place. So yeah, over 40 employees now, and we're over $2 billion in assets.
Yeah, that's by any standards an awesome growth trajectory. And I think in the wealth management industry that, I came out of a large national insurance firm as my background, and their methodology for gaining new clients was begging for referrals, networking, golf outings, join a charity. I always found a lot of those things to be I felt a little duplicitous doing it, right? Like I'm joining a charity or a board or something like this for networking purposes to then try and turn these people into clients or things like
I'm also awful at golf, so.
Yeah, I gave up golf. I have 4 kids, so the 4 kids in a startup company, golf is bottom of the list. So one of the things that I find really interesting about this is you were in the institutional asset space. Great financial crisis hits, you're reading financial blogs and kind of looking around to understand the world. What are a couple of the values? You mentioned that Barry and Josh and Michael and yourself coalesced around some values about how you thought the industry should be serving clients and wasn't, or something like. Expound on that a little bit more, because I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, there's a few things. I mean, the first thing was just transparency and having your own voice. I liked the way that people were talking they were writing in their own voice. Yeah. Kind of how they would speak to people. And it wasn't this stodgy stuff that you see in a financial publication. It was, they were referencing pop culture and making jokes and not taking themselves too seriously, but it's still sort of, it was a way to help tell the story better and understand it. And then I guess the other big thing was just, it was more process oriented. So there were so many people coming out of the financial crisis who saw some people make a ton of notoriety and a ton of money. Yep. Predicting the crisis, right? And so I think everyone thought, okay, well, I have to predict the next one, the next big something, whether it's a big bull run or a big bear market or whatever it is. And you forget how hard that is to do. And so most of it was not guessing, this is the next stock to buy, this is what the market's going to do in the next month, this is what it's going to do, here's our year-end target. It was putting context around what's going on. So it wasn't like guessing the path of interest rates. It was talking about, here's what happens to the markets if rates rise or if they fall, and just giving more perspective and context than trying to guess what was going to happen next or tell exactly what happened. And so that really resonated with me in terms of like putting it into context for people and not just trying to guess what's going to happen next.
Do you think that part of the key there being, authenticity, right? You mentioned writing in your own voice. I'm sure you get emails, as I do, from fund managers and strategists and investment people, and man, they're dry or insanely technical. Do you think that you guys had to be in an independent RIA space in order to have the freedom to use your own voice to connect on the content you were creating?
Probably. We definitely hear from other people in the industry at much bigger firms, and they say to us, we would love to do what you guys do, but we can't because of compliance reasons. So I think because we started independent and small, and we didn't have someone looking over our shoulder, it was easier for us to have, a set of unspoken rules about, there are some things you just probably don't do, but we didn't ever lay that out. It was kind of just use common sense and don't do something that is going to make yourself or the firm look bad, and don't try to do something that you can't, or that's going to affect, look badly on the firm in terms of trying to guess something or make a prediction or forecast that it's going to make you look like an idiot down the line potentially. So I think that was part of it. Yeah, that independence to be, like you said, authentic. And I think part of it is our CEO Josh always says, for better or worse, people like to work with people that they like and respect.
Yes. And
that so being authentic and being yourself, I think that's the great thing about that is clients know right away either they're going to be attracted to work with you and your firm or they're not. And so it's easier to make that decision one way or another. That way, if you know for sure someone's not a good fit, that's great. Like we know quicker down the line, we don't have to waste too much time. And if someone is a good fit, then you can move forward a little quicker. And I think it just putting yourself out there shortens that window. Yep. And so you develop the trust. People feel like they know you. They've been following you for years sometimes before they reach out again because something happens in their life or just because they realize, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to hand over the steering wheel to someone else. And so, yeah, that whole thing really, and I think that was a big lesson for me early on in producing content, was don't try to be someone else and copy someone else's style. You have to find your own voice and write about stuff that you actually care about, because if you're doing it just to try to check some boxes and say, okay, I did it this week, and you're writing about something that you don't care about, or your heart's not really in it, people are going to know that right away and understand that, okay, there's nothing here for me.
Yeah, I think that one of our core values at Lifeworks is authenticity, and it kind of is also grounded in that word you said, transparency. When we set Lifeworks up, we said, let's put our fee schedule and our financial planning fees. We do a monthly subscription, fee. And let's put it right on a website, right? And let's make it so easy that the ability for somebody to choose how to align with a firm, because they can clearly see what the value proposition is. They can see what's being offered, as opposed to well, I have to hire you, and then over the next 4, 6, 8 months or a year, we figure that out, right? Which I think is the status quo for most of the industry, right? There's still a lot of opaqueness around what is it that they actually do? How do they charge fees? Things like this. I want to pick up on, so one of the questions I want to talk to you about, because I think you guys are way far ahead of anybody else that I've seen in the space in terms of creating authentic content to build trust. You mentioned leveraging that trust and also kind of shortening the gap between somebody being a stranger and then somebody trusting you with their life savings, right? How long do you think that takes on average? Because I can imagine advisors listening going, Ron, that's great. I don't have 6 years to be writing and blogging and podcasting. I want to grow tomorrow, right? How do you balance the immediacy with also maybe what needs to be a long-term commitment to creating an authentic voice for the firm or for the advisor?
Yeah, and I've had people reach out and say, I want to go from 0 to 60, and I want to take my podcast to these heights, and I want to get all these readers and build this audience. And I think the good thing for me is that I went into it with no expectations. I think that's helpful. I know there are people out there who can say, I'm going to be an influencer, I'm going to start a brand, and I'm going to build this audience, and here's how I'm going to do it. I don't really have that mindset or personality, so for me it was more following where my interests led me. And I think that was the same thing for Josh and Barry and Michael and all these other content creators we have at the firm, is that they were doing this before we ever thought we were going to leverage it. And once we realized that, okay, let's double down and do some more. But I think that's part of it for people, is not having those expectations that you're going to build an audience, especially for financial advisors. I hear from people all the time who ask, I want to do something like this. And I tell them, the first people you need to talk to is your clients you already have, right? Yeah. So that should be your goal for your content. If you develop an audience from that further, that's great, but work right off the bat with starting some sort of email newsletter or blog on your company's site where you can communicate with clients better and help them understand, because you know the questions that you get on a regular basis, or the questions that you're going to get. Depending on what happens with the market, if you've worked in this industry long enough, you know the questions that are going to come from certain investors. And so if you can get ahead of those questions and sort of save yourself some time. So we have our content creators at our firm, but then we also have a bunch of people that you don't see on the operations side and client-facing advisors. And the great thing for those client-facing advisors is they're not handling calls at all hours of the day with people asking questions about the market, or what do you guys think about this? What do you think about this? Because it's out there for people to see. And so that way, when they get on the phone or a video call with one of our advisors, they can talk about their own circumstances, because if they want to know what we think about it, it's
already out there.
Yeah, they know where to find it in a podcast or a blog or a YouTube clip or Josh on CNBC, whatever it is. So that's kind of the strategy, is it makes our advisors more efficient, because they're not having to answer the same questions over and over again, where you can answer one question to hundreds of clients potentially with a single blog post or email newsletter.
Yeah, from a structure standpoint, how do you guys navigate somebody maybe being attracted to your podcast or your blog versus Josh's or Barry's? How do you guys bring that service model together, or do you not? Do you have each of you guys still ends up kind of having, I'm not going to say silos, but tranches of clients and advisors that work underneath you because they're attracted to your voice as opposed to the firm? Or have you guys managed to bring that together and standardize the?
Yeah, well, obviously the best case scenario is someone saw Josh on CNBC and that led them to his blog, which led them to my blog and Michael, and so that's the best case scenario.
They get a little taste of everybody.
But there certainly are times where there's someone who follows Barry's podcast on Bloomberg and he's the only one they know, and they just want to get to know that better. And certainly there are in that case, you have to have a better story about the whole firm and explain to someone what exactly the firm does, because all they know is Barry's interviews with these really well-known advisors and investors and economists on Bloomberg. So we've certainly honed that story of the firm to tell people, because everyone coming to us is not going to know it exactly. And then you also have potential referrals from current clients, right? That people are coming in and they don't know you. We've had situations too where we have a spouse of a client who the husband or the wife will find us on the internet, and then the other one, their spouse will say, "So wait, you found these guys on the internet and they're going to be managing our life savings? If you're not part of that world, that sounds ridiculous."
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
To certain people. And then you have to, I'd say, I'm estimating here back of the envelope, but 70 to 75% of our clients, maybe 80% now, we've never met in person.
That's awesome.
And we made a effort for sure before the pandemic to, a few times a year, some of us would get together and go to a different city and try
and meet some people.
Yeah, try to meet and see them. And I think the pandemic has maybe even changed that equation a little bit, where some people aren't even going to care about that anymore because they're so used to video calls and everything else now. And that was another thing where we kind of lucked into. We already had kind of this remote firm doing that and had that relationship with clients before because they knew us from the internet. And so the pandemic almost doubled down on that for us.
We had the same experience, obviously a younger firm than you guys, but our client base was national. We had been meeting clients through our digital marketing channels. And still to this day, I have owners and executives at large firms and younger advisors just starting that are still blown away that you can meet somebody online digitally, whether through a video we're doing, a webinar, or you guys' podcast, or an interview, and turn that into a very meaningful and trusting client relationship very quickly.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that is that it opens up your potential for different clients.
Yes.
It also increases your competition, obviously.
Yeah.
So in the old days, you'd be competing with 3 or 4 different advisors in Grand Rapids, Michigan, that people wanted to come drive down and sit across the desk from them. Now they can go to any other national firm as well. So it's interesting that it opens up both the competition and the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've told everybody on our team, and I tell young advisors this, and I'll share this with the group that I'm speaking to tonight. The industry is so large, and there's so much opportunity for authentic voices and different mechanisms of delivering value to clients, that I would rather have a much faster in or out, like, are we a good fit or aren't we a good fit, based on the things we're doing. Because when you build a national firm, whether it's creating content through blogging, writing, interviews, or some of like the live webinars we're doing, our take on it is you expand the possibility of people and the reach significantly. And thankfully, the silver lining of COVID, I do believe, is that regardless of the age demographic, everybody now is used to video calls and conferencing and working that way, right?
And that's why, like, we don't even see other firms in this industry as like some sort of competition either, because there are going to be certain firms that are better for certain clients, and certain clients aren't going to be right for us. So like the first call that we have with clients, we call it a client fit call, and we're trying to determine not only is this client a good fit for us, but are we a good fit for them, and are they asking us to do stuff that we either can't or won't do, or their expectations are too high for something that maybe you're better off going with another firm. So that's kind of the way we look at it too, is that it's kind of a two-way street in terms of how much time and effort you're putting in, and hopefully, again, that content helps break down that a little bit, where you funnel it a little bit beforehand, but it's still there's always time for the need for more communication when you actually get a client who's saying, okay, I have my money, I want to talk to someone, let's do this.
Maybe off topic a little bit for the podcast, but you mentioned it, and I'm curious and want to dig in, and I think people listening too. So you have a client fit call. Take us through a really high level what your client acquisition and client onboarding process then looks like, and how long did it take you guys to systematize that, or I'm not going to say perfect it, because it's like probably always a work in progress, but how long did it take you guys to where you had that down to a fairly seamless, like, we've created content, we have people reaching out, asking questions, engaging, and here's how we're going to help build trust rapidly and then bring them on board as a client?
Well, this is before I started, but Josh and Barry kind of had these 2 really well-known blogs, and they sort of joined forces and came together, and they were people who were doing content. They didn't really have the chops in terms of being a financial advisor and running a wealth management practice. And so they brought in our head of wealth management, Chris Venn, who went through the Wells Fargo program for a number of years and really learned how to manage prospects and clients and have a system in place. And he showed up on the first day, and Josh and Barry had Post-it notes of people, oh, this client called with $5 million, and we need to get back to them. And they had and Chris came in and said, I think at his interview, basically started saying, we need to do this, we need to do this. And Chris kind of came in, and he's more of a behind-the-scenes guy who helped systematize the process. And the great thing about that is that as we added more advisors, and some advisors came to us who already had a book of business and clients, and some advisors are the more junior advisors who are learning and starting at the bottom up, where Chris had this process in place where we have a certain number of calls. We have 4 calls with clients, and each call has a specific idea with it. So we have the fit call and then the gathering information, and each call has its own sort of little, it builds up to the process to the end where the client at the end can decide whether you're going to say yay or nay, and I'm going to go through this process. So it's kind of a lengthy process for the client. Getting back to the transparency thing, we want to make sure the client has everythhave they need to know beforehand. So you're right, it's not 8 months in, here's how we do this. It's here's exactly how we're going to do this. We're going to help you build a plan, and then you can decide whether you want to have us orchestrate that plan for you or not. So having Chris and someone who'd been through a training program at a wealth management firm come tailor that training and process to us as an RIA, he could take sort of the best and worst practices that he'd learned and help. And obviously we've crafted that as we brought on more advisors. But yeah, that's kind of the idea.
Yeah, I think regardless of where an advisor's at, whether they're just starting or they've been in it a while and they're looking at going independent, like probably the best thing that we did, and it sounds like you guys did as well, is finding somebody on the operational side to help build a scalable process, one that we can also go back to our clients and say, how can we improve this, right? And that's something we're doing. Our process is probably fairly similar. We use some language that's essentially, it's just as important for us to make sure that you're the right fit for us to take on, because as a fiduciary, when we say we are signing up to do X, Y, and Z for you, we want to be able to actually meet those expectations and hold up that end of the relationship. And that we take that seriously, right?
And we had some, and like systematizing it as much as we can. Obviously, each advisor is going to have their own sort of personal way of communicating or storytelling. But we had some advisors who had been advisors at other firms and came into us. And at first, I think they tried to do their old thing and not really follow the system. And we're wondering, well, why is this not working as well? We have these prospects coming in, and we have a training program that'll kind of step back if things aren't working out very well and say, let's start and go through the process and record some of these, and you following those steps. Once I'm really going to go for it and follow exactly these steps are and follow the process. It's not a script by any means, but it's still systematized enough where it should be pretty consistent across clients. And once they did that, they realized, okay, this is
it works.
And it's funny because the junior people coming in who had never been at another firm, for them, they didn't know anything else, so they followed it. Yeah, they followed it right away. And sometimes the junior people are helping the more senior people, which is interesting, which is why it's so important to have that, especially as you grow as a firm. If you don't have that systematized process and everyone's doing their own thing and clients are hearing different things from different advisors, it's never going to work.
Yeah, chaos.
Yeah.
There's one thing to having authentic voices and unique service offerings from advisors and clients inside of a firm. There's another thing to just have everybody doing it their own way and just sharing the name.
We look at it like the philosophy is universal, and then the strategy for each individual client and circumstances can be personal.
Yes.
That's kind of the way we look at it.
Yeah. So you guys, again, leaders in the content creation space, you have a national following. I know you guys do a lot of work with other advisors and probably talk to numerous firms and different people. Let's talk a little bit about what some of the most significant challenges that you see facing advisors and firms today in the wealth management space.
I do think one of the problems for a lot of advisors, especially if they're on the smaller end or they're kind of in between, you have the really small advisors on one end and they have the really huge ones on the other end. Yep. And those huge ones have enough financial backing, to implement all these new technologies that they want. They could build their own, they could outsource them. And I think integrating all those technologies now is so important. And unfortunately, a lot of them these technology providers don't talk to one another, they don't fit. You need people to run them and make sure that they fit within a firm. And I think that's one of the hard things for a lot of advisors is that investing back into their firm and staying in touch with all those new technologies, and that the fact that clients are going to come to expect that stuff and not be upcharged for it or something. And So I think for a lot of smaller advisors, that means potentially lower margins because they're going to have to invest more in their business and use these technologies. So I think that's going to be really challenging because again, a lot of it's going to be table stakes in the future. That if you don't have this stuff to make my life easier, I'm going to go with someone who does.
And that's interesting because that's essentially part of where Lifeworks started building our own software platform, right? I had this misconception when I left a large firm with my co-founder that we'd be able to go out there and just essentially buy all the best technology and hook it all up together. And we started talking about what our tech stack looked like. I hear that all the time. And 18 months in, we had 20 different software platforms that we were duct taping everything behind the scenes. I say duct taping, like this one talked to this one, but not all the data. And then this one talked to our CRM, but not all the data. And we found that we had to add human, capital to manage everything and make it fairly seamless for our clients. Right. And then I looked out there and I said, well, if you can open an account on one of the leading robo-advisors in 3 minutes, like, why can't we do that? Right? Like that eventually has to come to advisors and that level of automation. So I think table stakes is the great way to put it, right? Having an amazing client experience or having a very seamless and easy client onboarding experience is going to be just table stakes. Have to have it.
Yes, yeah, and that's why we invested heavily in an operations team up front because we didn't want to make it a pain in the butt for clients to come on board. Once they decided, I'm going to give you my money, we don't want to have a bunch of back and forth and make it hard for them to sign up. We wanted to make it seamless, and that's why we're basically a paperless firm now. Everything is done online. Yep. It's easy to sign the documents online and send stuff back and forth. And we don't want to make the client have to work for it. If they want to give you money, make it easy for them.
Yeah, I think our people that have listened to this podcast a while have heard me kind of analogize a lot of the wealth management industry's process with clients to kind of like a DMV-like experience. We've kind of resigned ourselves like, there's a 40-page application and we got to go through all this stuff and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think firms that are challenging that, and I'm glad that you highlighted that because I do believe the space in between, the land in between a lifestyle practice and wanting to grow a firm is going to be more difficult to navigate because of this than I think what most advisors realize.
Right. And most advisors, frankly, want to just be advisors. They want to work with clients. They don't want to spend all their time prospecting. They don't want to spend all their time rebalancing a portfolio or tax loss harvesting or trying to chase stuff down for paperwork. Yeah, they just want to be advised. And that's, frankly, what we've had a few of those smaller practices roll into ours because they eventually said, we're getting to the point where we're too big to be a lifestyle practice. And we need to either grow or have someone else come do this for us.
Yeah. One of the challenges that I see for advisors, and I think this is a challenge on the small end and the large end, and one of the things that I wanted to ask your insights on, is this idea of creating their voice content creation. I see a lot of done-for-you services, and I'm not going to pick on any of them because I understand the business proposition. But it's impersonal, it's not customized. The same newsletter, email template, or content or story is going to thousands of people. How does an advisor balance serving their clients, maybe managing some staff, technology growth, and finding time and space to create some content and have a voice?
Yeah, I think we're lucky in the fact that we were doing the content already because a lot of people always ask us, well, how do you find so much time to do the content?
You started there, and it's just a natural level. You guys have just kept it.
And people say, how do you have time? And it's like, well, we have time because we make time because content is a focus of our firm. That without the content, the firm doesn't grow and doesn't bring in new. So that's a focus that we can have because we've made it a priority. It's probably a lot harder for a firm that has not made it a priority to then turn around and do that. So you have to obviously make time for it. But the funny thing to me about content is that a lot of times it's hard to understand what is going to hit people the right way or what's going to be. For example, one of the first days I joined Ritholtz, I kind of, because I was working for a nonprofit at the time, I obviously was not managing outside client money. I joined Ritholtz and I said, hey, now I'm actually with this firm. If anyone who's been reading me and reached out over the years said, hey, I'd love to talk to you about helping manage my money, you can do that now. So we had a decent number of readers reach out. And one of the readers reached out, we kind of asked, why did you reach out? What was it, and this gentleman who ended up becoming a client and a rather large client of ours said, I was Googling bond funds versus owning individual bonds. and your blog post about it, which sounds like the most boring topic in the world, was the first one to pop up.
Yeah.
I read it, and it sort of resonated with me, so I went down the rabbit hole and started following your blog, and then I realized you work for this firm, and now I want to talk to you. And so sometimes I think if you try to create content that you think is going to go viral or is going to get a bunch of people to read it, it's much harder to do than it sounds.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll spend weeks thinking through a piece and writing and crafting, and it just lands flat. And I'll think, I really was into this one, and then another one I'll put off in 15 minutes. It'll be a short couple paragraphs, and a bunch of people will read it. And sometimes it's hard to guess the audience. So that's why I think you have to just write stuff that frankly interests you and almost forget about the audience and use it as, for me, the most cathartic thing about writing is that it helps me think through, what do I really think about this stuff? And then you take that one
You have to fully flush out the concept and the idea and work through it.
Yeah, you have to, and I think that podcasting is taking that a step further, where you have even more time to flesh out some ideas. So that's, for me, something that which was a great unintended consequence I never thought about was, the more often I write, like the more I want to learn and understand what I think about this, and I view it as, for me, it's personally enriching and helpful, and if other people find it helpful too, that's great too. But I think that's a way to approach it is thinking through how it can help your own process of investing, communicating, and I think, to me, I was never a big writer beforehand. In college and high school, I hated writing papers. It wasn't until I found a topic, the markets and behavior of investors in the economy, that really resonated with me, that I could go, if I write about stuff that I'm interested in, it actually, I enjoy it. And the more you do it, I feel like the better you get. Because I go back and look at the stuff I wrote. You're talking about, people who want to just start now and get that audience and go. If you've never done this before, you may not want that, because at first your stuff might not be that great.
Yeah.
So I think you have to do it on a consistent basis and sort of tell yourself, every Tuesday I'm going to send out a newsletter to clients regardless, and I'm going to put myself on this schedule, and it's going to be a deadline. And the more you do it, I think the better you can. It's almost like a muscle where you can get better at it over time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I look back at the first videos we did at Lifeworks and the videos we're producing today, and even the first episode of this podcast series of Future Advice. I look at just the evolution over the last year of getting to do it and having a deadline for it. So that's interesting. How much time if you were to look at your time allocation as 100% between all your duties, how much time would you say you have focused to content development and creation? And does it vary from week to week, or is it kind of set?
There's certain stuff where we put the podcast out every Wednesday, so we do that once a week, and we kind of have that scheduled. The blog I try to write on a regular basis, but a lot of times it's depending on what's going on in the news and what is sort of what I'm reading through and thinking about. Yep. And that is one of the stranger parts to people who aren't in this world, is that a lot of your job really is just reading and following stuff, and a lot of times it's what am I reading that I find interesting and would like to either learn more about or try to jot some thoughts down. So it's not really, I don't have a percentage of time allocated. There's certainly stuff that we do on a regular basis that's part of my schedule, but I think it's, again, especially for people starting out, I think it helps to do it on a regular cadence, not only for you in becoming a better writer, but that way people can expect it to be there, right? If you have some sort of email newsletter going out, you're writing your blog and then it shoots out an email to people, if they're getting it at all chaotic times, they're not going to know. But if they expect it every Tuesday morning, and people expect it to be a regular thing, I think that's a good habit to get into.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think one of the things that has been an interesting mind shift for me, or an evolution of thinking, was when we started putting out some of our content at Lifeworks, I really had this passion for it has to be original, right? Like, we have to be talking about something that nobody else is talking about. And the reality is, with the internet, there's 10,000 people talking about the same thing we're talking about at any point in time. And what we've come to learn, and maybe you can verify this, is it's even less about it being original and it just being the reality that if we found it interesting and we were tying it to something we were seeing in our business, the likelihood that all of our clients read the same things that we read that week is slim to none, right? So even just kind of filtering down to some things that we thought had interesting implications or connections or importance for, our investment strategies or, interest rates or whatever.
Yeah.
So we find sometimes that I think what we're doing is maybe not repackaging, but we're kind of amalgamating interesting things and sharing them.
Well, yeah, I had a similar view when I first started out. Everything has to be creative or unique, and you realize you can't reinvent the wheel every day. And plus, there's a handful of financial topics that in tenets of investing that are just never going to change. They're always going. I think Charlie Munger had the quote like, "No one goes to church to hear the 11th commandment," right? So, like, you have your high-level principles of you personally as an investor or your firm, and you look for different ways of telling that story. Right? So Jason Zweig at the Wall Street Journal once said he's writing about the same 10 or 15 topics a year 100 different times. He's just telling it in a different way. And so it's using different analogies or talking about what's going on in the market, how that sort of shapes, how your philosophy shapes what's going on right now and how that fits within what's going on. So I agree. The amount of stuff that we look at in this industry, I think we take that for granted sometimes, that most normal people
don't digest this much stuff.
They don't care. They don't have time to, and so you're right. So early on, I had someone reach out after I'd written the blog for a couple of years, and asked me to write a book. A publisher reached out, and I said, "What can I possibly write in a book that hasn't been written a million times already?" And so I talked to a few people who had written a book, and they told me, "Well, of course that's true, but who cares? You're writing it for your audience." A lot of these people have never read all those other books you've read, and you can tell your own. You've already written it because you've written all these blog posts. Use some of those. Don't try to make it any better. Take the best of what you've written and turn that into a book, and then it acts as more of a business card than you're changing the world by putting. So that's kind of the way to think about it. Is you're right that there are going to be certain people that come across something and they've never heard it said that way or presented that way before, even though to you it might seem like old hat.
Yeah. Talk to me about the potential danger of creating frivolous content just to create content. I see a little bit of this as I'm re-engaging or just starting to engage in Twitter, which some days just seems like a dumpster fire of epic proportions. Talk to me about the dangers of advisors or people creating frivolous content and posting, their cat stories and whatever. Like, how does that diminish potentially, or does it not?
I mean, we tell this to our clients all the time. Like, we know there's no way that the majority of our clients are consuming all of our content. And so we all started with blogs, then we moved into podcasts, and now we're doing some video stuff too. And I think one thing we've learned is that you don't know where people are going to find you. But you also have to your point about doing frivolous stuff, you also have to be kind of intelligent about how you present yourself, right? And I always found the word brand kind of, I don't like to think about it that way in terms of like you're writing your content. But I think there's a difference between sharing some personal elements of yourself and stuff that you've gone through in the past and your experiences, and understanding what can be helpful to people with those experiences. And you're right, and what is just puking stuff up on the paper for no reason. So especially if people follow you because of your financial content, I think you have to walk a fine line between sharing some personal anecdotes here and there, but being smart about it, and doing it at the right time, not constantly oversharing if it's something that people are following you because of the stuff you do professionally. So yeah, I agree that there can be far too much oversharing, and frankly, for a lot of people, that's going to turn them off at a certain point. So I think you have to be careful about doing too much of that. I do think, getting back to the authenticity thing, people like that when you share parts of yourself, and I think that's one of the things I learned from the podcast that was surprising to me, is that sharing that personal stuff often gets a much bigger reaction than some opinion about the market or whatever. And it can sometimes be a one-off thing, but you couldn't make the whole show like that, because then no one cares, really. No one cares.
Ben Carlson show. It's about my life.
Yeah, no one cares about your life. They, people care about their own lives, and they don't want to hear. So it has to be kind of directed in a way that you can kind of help people understand why you're sharing this, and there's a reason for it.
Yeah. What is the right approach in your opinion? I got somebody on my team beat me up for this the other day. Again, I was fairly new to Twitter over the last couple of months, so I've just been kind of dipping my toe in the water and testing it out. And I'm reading stuff, and I'm a fairly libertarian-leaning, individual. Really despise most politicians and political parties, and they're like, "Hey, Ron, you realize every time you like something on Twitter, or you heart it, like it shows up on your feed. You really need to think about the clients that are maybe seeing this." So the point, I guess, the question I'd want to ask is, what's the right way to potentially balance having your individual kind of online persona and representation of your voice, and mixing that with the professional? Should you have two separate kind of accounts and personas, and never the two shall mix? Or is there an appropriate way to potentially, have somebody seeing, things you're posting about work in a professional sense, and then, maybe something about, God forbid, politics, or, you know what I mean? Is there a right and a wrong that you guys have experience there in terms of doing that?
The political thing obviously has probably gotten even worse in the last number of years and cycles, where it seems everyone wants to be part of a team or whatever, and if you're part of one team, then you can't associate with the other team, and that's tough. I've just never been a very political person myself anyway, so I try to stay away from that, because I know even if I have a strong opinion about something, I'm probably not going to convince anyone else, especially on Twitter. No one's ever changed their mind on Twitter. I don't think people come to change their mind.
Hopefully not.
They come for confirmation bias and to find their own
herd.
Yeah, their own herd, and so I've never been a person to get into that stuff. So I try to stay away from that if I can. I'll occasionally share stuff about my kids or movies and TV shows I'm watching, but I guess that's about as far as I usually go with it. And I think that's just my personality. We have some people who at the firm have some stronger personalities, and they'll share more stuff about that. And occasionally there will be blowback, and occasionally clients will. And so you do have to be careful, I think, with some of that stuff, that you're not making a comment or saying something that's going to alienate someone. Because the way we think about it is like something like politics has no use in a portfolio, because this happens every time that there's a change from one party to the next, especially with president. There's always going to be a certain number of people saying, "Oh no, okay, this is it. The economy's going to tank.
The world's going to hell in a handbasket."
And it happens whether you're going from Republican to Democrat or Democrat to Republican. There's always going to be one side that says this. And we have. I remember when there was the Trump-Clinton election, and it was very, very close, and we didn't know. And the night before the election, Barry Ritholtz, our investment chairman, wrote a letter, and he wrote the whole letter to the clients, what he was going to say, and he left out the word Trump or Clinton. And afterwards, he could go fill in.
Just fill in.
And the whole point of it was, regardless of who wins or loses, your portfolio is not going to change. The way we manage money is not going to change. This has happened before, going from one president to the next, and it always sort of happens. And just keeping the politics out of your portfolio is really smart, because if you let that sort of invade your thought process, it's tough to come back from.
Yeah, in politics I pick on because it's obviously the one that is the most galvanizing, I think, out there. But some of the younger advisors on our team and team members of ours have a really large personal, like, social media platform, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, etc. And so one of the things that we've just been thinking through is the balance there of how do they maybe take that, thousands and thousands of connections, friends, followers, etc., and start to move the needle if they want to, in terms of sharing what they do at work or what Lifeworks does or something. And so I don't have an opinion as to, like, the right balance there, or
Well, it's interesting that
institutionalize that.
Like you and I don't know how old you are. We're probably similar ages. We didn't
40 in 3 weeks. I turned 40 in 3 weeks.
Okay, so I turned 40 just a couple months ago.
Okay, we're right there.
So yeah, we didn't grow up with this stuff. I set up a Twitter account just for the sole purpose of sharing blog posts and sharing, and that was the reason I did it. So I never did it because I wanted to get into social media and the other stuff. So I think it is interesting where people who are now growing up with it all the time, and they're going to have Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook, and that's just going to be part of their lives. Yeah, how do you separate the professional from the personal? Because I didn't grow up with that, that's a harder question for me to answer, because I got into it strictly for the finance stuff, and I think that's why it's so important to have a good filter too. You talked about all the junk that can be thrown out there. I think after a while you figure which are the right sources to follow, and which people to ignore, mute, or whatever. And that's one of the great things about it is, if there's a certain topic going on and you're not sure of it, you can almost always find a good expert on one of these platforms in finance. So if you have the right filter in place, I think this social media stuff can be great, especially for, I basically use Twitter as a place to source my news about what's going on in the financial world, right? And I think if you approach it the right way, and try to ignore a lot of the other stuff that can go on there that can just be a time suck, it can be a useful place, but it just depends how you use it.
Well, yeah, and so for me it was funny because the guys on my team were saying, Ron, you got to get a Twitter profile, that's an area that you're not doing anything and you really should be sharing more there. And so my kind of bumbling through it this summer was set up a Twitter profile. It was like, hey, this makes a really great news aggregator. And so I went out there and found, authors and columnists and thinkers and bloggers that I really like, followed all of them. And now I'm like, well, I can, in 7.5 minutes in the morning over breakfast, skim, a really significant amount of data and mark stuff that I want to go deeper on or read. What I didn't realize, because I didn't know enough about the platform, and I had told them that I want to learn how to use the platform before I start using it for work, again, was that every time I was liking something, right? And so I was, going through emotionally liking some different articles and things like this, and then I was like, oh, well, now my Twitter history is, right. And so this is something that I think about for maybe even, for the younger advisors that are listening that grew up with this. I didn't either, right? I think there is a healthy way to leverage those connections and relationships that they build. I don't have the answer for it yet, but I think maybe the wrong approach might be to go kind of this hard Chinese firewall where you have Ron in the suit and I only post business stuff, and then Ron with my 4 kids in my Carhartts, in my wood shop, right?
And I think you have to find so I've had the question from time to time from advisors saying, all right, I'm starting a blog. What do I put it on LinkedIn? Do I put it on Twitter? Do I go to Facebook? Yeah. And I don't think that there is really a right or wrong answer. I do think having your own website and having your own jumping off point for people to get to better know you and have an introduction to you is, I think so. I think that makes sense to have your own starting point, but then how you distribute that or where you go, I think depends on who you're trying to reach. And I know there's plenty of advisors who do spend a lot of time on LinkedIn and think that's a good way to prospect for people. I don't know how much help Twitter really is to something like our business, and for me, that's probably more. It's probably more of a personal thing than it is for firm-wide thing that's really helpful there in terms of growing your presence in your business. So I think it depends what you want to get out of it, depending on what platform you use.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned you went from your blog to podcasts. Next evolution is more in the video space. I know you guys have a couple of professional videographers on staff. Tell us about why the evolution to video and what you think the future of content creation and delivery looks like.
That's frankly something that I miss. I'm never really good on getting on trends before they're going to take off.
Other than creating content and going from a $100 million RIA to a $2 billion RIA in 6 years. But other than that trend.
But so we started the blogging first and kind of figured that was enough. Then we did the podcast. And a few years ago, our CEO, Josh, said, listen, video is the next step, especially young people. They don't trust the financial news networks as much anymore. All the people who watch that, for the majority, are older. They're 50 or 60 and up. Yeah. That crowd is probably never going to change, but young people get their information from other places. We need to get a YouTube presence. And I remember Michael, who's my podcast host, and I kind of said, do we really need are people going to sit and watch this stuff? And surprisingly, they do. And it took a long time to build our audience and get more high quality video. And that's a lot harder for advisors to do. Yeah, like you said, we had to hire some people who really could help make those videos look good and not just do it on our own. And I don't think people care as much about the quality these days. It just has to look okay, like it's not some shaky handheld thing. But
interestingly enough, some of the most prominent influencers on like Instagram or TikTok that are in the financial space, I find myself watching some of their videos sometimes, and they're impromptu. They've set their phone up and they're talking to their phone. I haven't managed to make that transition yet. That one feels a little weird. But then you look at it and you're like, 1.2 million people watch that. Right.
So we record our podcast and put it up on YouTube, and a few people on YouTube had said, listen, I'm not a podcast person. I only consume it on YouTube because I have 3 screens and I have one of them and I have stuff going on in the background during the day. And I would prefer to watch the podcast. And we said, no one's going to want this. And surprisingly, there are people who just consume it through YouTube and not podcasts. So that's, again, why I think trying to guess this stuff and what's going to work, I do think it makes sense for people to focus on probably one area when they're first getting started. Branching out is a lot harder to do if you're going to do, I've seen people try to do 10 different things at once, and then none of them are very good. Yeah. So I think you do have to get one avenue down, whether it's recording yourself on audio and doing a podcast or doing a blog or having videos. I think try to focus on one at first. Yeah. But yeah, there are a lot of different avenues where people can get stuff these days. It's kind of like the financial advising industry we talked about, how there's so much more competition. Yeah. There's competition for eyeballs these days too, and attention span. And so I think finding people in other places is not a bad idea if you can do it.
Yeah, and I thought a couple of years back, just like your CEO, Josh, that video was going to be the thing we had to figure out how to do really well. And we're still on that evolution, not claiming that we have, right? But it is something that I think if you look at news ratings and viewership numbers across traditional media channels, they're plummeting significantly, especially at the younger age of the demographics, like, 45 and down. There's almost nobody watching those things anymore.
And I mean, you could make the case that there's never been more wealth created for people in their 20s and 30s than right now, especially in tech and these sorts of things. And they're not going to find you on these places anymore. They're going to find you elsewhere.
Agreed. All right, let's shift gears just a little bit. I know we've talked about some things that we think are the future of the industry and content related, but let's dial in with this question and then we'll jump from here. What is the wealth management industry in your view, in your vision? What does the wealth management industry look like 5, 10, 20 years from now?
So there's this great Jeff Bezos quote where he says, people all the time ask me, like, how are things going to change? And my retort is, no one ever asks me how things aren't going to change. So I think there's probably a lot of things that are still going to be the same, where people are still going to want to, especially if they have a lot of money, talk to a human being. At a certain point, technology can help, but I think people still going to want to talk to a human being. Trust is still going to be a huge element of it. I think the one thing clients are always going to want to know at a certain point is, am I going to be okay? If I do this decision with my money, am I going to be okay? And I think human beings can still help with that. So even though technology is going to become much more important there, I think focusing on that stuff that's not going to change, that trust and storytelling and selling yourself and your story and your firm's sort of vision, I think that stuff is always going to be important. I do think it's just going to be easier and easier for clients to, like you said, the sign-up process. And if people can download an app on their phone and link their bank account in 5 minutes and be trading immediately on their phone, and that user interface is so easy to use and elegant, and people are going to want that for all aspects of their financial life, and if you can't give it to them, someone else will.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. We've touched on the technology thing a little bit, and I'm going to go just a little bit deeper because you guys mentioned when you've been growing the firm, you guys have been investing on your operations side and some of these things. How are you guys approaching the client experience, specifically like on the technology side? Are you guys approaching it with, well, we have to just build some of our own pieces, or are you guys using, other software platforms and customizing them? How are you guys making those kind of investment decisions and client experience decisions at Ritholtz?
I think we've done a little bit of both.
Okay.
And we've also put together some teams of people that are focused exclusively, like this group of 3 or 4 people. We did this in the last few years, is we're going to overhaul our whole process, and we wanted to shorten the time to bring someone on. We wanted to make it easier. We wanted to take down the amount of information someone had to put in, and so we had certain goals that we wanted to hit in terms of making it easier for people. So it was just such a seamless process for people that it didn't have to be a huge pain for them. And so yeah, that's something where it was some internal projects that we had to create, and then some external. But yeah, you're right. People want that to be much easier. Especially, I agree that the Wealthfront and Betterment, when they came in, and their technology and their interface was so good and easy. I think that's one of the unheralded things that they did that for the finance industry, is just made that so much easier.
Yeah, I mean, I think and I use Wealthfront as an example. I have no investments in them, not connected to them, no insider knowledge, but I use them as an example all the time about what every financial firm should be striving towards in terms of just simplicity of onboarding a client and clients, having this really beautiful, seamless interaction, right?
So we have a partnership with Betterment, and we've tried to, because a lot of financial advisors will have a minimum, and we started out that way. We had a minimum and we had it low, and we bumped it up, and we realized we had all these people who were following our content who were saying, listen, I don't meet your minimum. I still want some help, and I want to talk to an advisor. And so we partnered with Betterment to create, using their automated platform, a platform for it that could also be paired with an advisor and a human advisor that you could help, work through your problems and create a financial plan. So it was a little bit of the robo-advisor stuff on one hand, but also the human element touch on the other hand, where you're talking to an advisor, you can help create a financial plan, answer your questions. And so we've partnered with them on that, and that's one of the faster growing areas of our business is kind of under the typical financial advisor minimum, where you can still help serve people no matter what their assets are. And the great thing about that for us is you could get a lot of people who have a high income but don't have a lot of assets yet. Right? And
or it's all in their 401k or stock options at work.
And eventually that person is going to make a great client. And we've had other clients who are in our more regular wealth management program who have kids that they want to open accounts for.
And they bring that in.
Yeah. So being able to offer that now when you have the ability, it's almost to us like, why wouldn't you? And so we've made a really big push on that to make that a big part of our practice as well.
Do you guys charge separately for planning then?
On that end, no. So that's kind of it. That's part of the fee that they get. So we have our sort of fee split with Betterment on that, but that kind of is baked into it.
Yep, got it. So you're using an AUM-based type of fee structure, but there's now no account minimums, and then that still creates the opportunity for you guys to start serving clients.
Right, and the way that we look at it too, from a firm perspective, that's good for us because we can start our junior advisors on that side of thing, and they can sort of learn, and they're typically working with younger clients, and they can kind of age and mature with those clients as well. So it's a great training tool for advisors as well.
Our industry talks a lot about recruiting next gen talent and the difficulties there, and there's layers to this, right, around building diverse teams and multi-generational teams. How are you guys approaching and solving that problem? You mentioned junior advisors a couple of times now. Tell us a little about that structure. How are you guys approaching solving that challenge of building, the next gen, team of advisors that's going to be the future for Ritholtz?
Well, that's another area where the content has had an unintended consequence of it's not only clients who are finding us through our content, it's also advisors in the space. And that was one of the things where coming from the nonprofit side of the world and working with endowments and foundations and pensions, when I started writing, I didn't write with a financial advisor audience in mind. I was writing where I'm trying to make financial concepts easier to understand for my friends and family who are the ones who are asking me questions. That was my whole goal at the beginning, is break these down easier. And I realized, again, most of those people aren't going to be reading this stuff all the time. And I found pretty early that most of the feedback I was getting was from financial advisors saying, hey, can I use this piece that you wrote to share with my clients because I think it explains this concept well. And, So a lot of advisors find us this way too, and we've actually found that to be a good recruiting tool as well, where people say, I've been reading you, I've been following along, if you ever have the need for someone who does this. And that's actually how we hired someone to come on in the past year to run our whole tax practice, and he was a podcast listener. And that's how he was introduced to the firm. He followed Michael and I on our podcast. We decided we wanted to expand our tax side of things, and he came in because he had got to know us as a firm by listening to the podcast first and then did a little more research. And so we found that actually putting out content is because people in the industry are following this stuff is actually another great. So there's very few times where we've had to put a post on LinkedIn or a job site. We've done that, of course, especially for like the operations roles. But for a lot of the advisor stuff, it kind of comes to us, and we're having those conversations on a regular basis, and sometimes it's a good fit and sometimes it's not. But that's kind of where we're finding these people come to us, where there's sort of an open door and they say, hey, I'd love to have a talk sometime about joining up with you guys.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's amazing how, again, you guys and your commitment to have, you guys started creating content and where it's brought you guys in terms of attracting next-gen talent, attracting next-gen wealth builders. I mean, I think it's not going to be the right model for everybody to follow, but I think there's a lot to learn from looking at you guys' story over the last few years and arguably, amazing, growth success and probably not slowing down anytime soon. All right, wrapping up, there's always two questions that I love to ask. A two-part question for you, and then I'll let you close with comments, thoughts, opining with some additional wisdom maybe. Here's the first part. If you could give one piece of advice to a young, growth-oriented, next-gen advisor, what would it be?
I think the most helpful thing to me, especially early in my career, was just to be a lifelong learner. And I just found reading and paying attention to this stuff for me has been very helpful, because when I came out of college, I frankly didn't know very much about the markets or I didn't have a very good base of knowledge beyond the financial textbooks. And I found my education really started almost after school for me. And I felt like I had way more to learn about how the real world worked versus stuff I was reading about in textbooks. And so I think that's one way that, especially for me, as someone who was never, I was never much of a natural born salesman. I always found that actually having to understand concepts and explain them was more helpful to me in terms of helping my communication ability. And I think that we talk about stuff that's not going to change. Like that ability to communicate and sell yourself and your firm is huge. So I think just constantly learning and trying to better understand the world, whether it's the markets or human behavior or financial planning topics, I think that's really helpful as a young person.
Awesome. Second part of the question. What advice would you give to the owners of firms who are trying to build teams and win clients in the digital age that we're in now?
So I think something that's been very helpful to us is having a more ensemble approach, where it's not the old school eat what you kill kind of thing, where it's sort of every person for themselves, and you're trying to find your clients, and then that client is yours. It's where we have people who are experts in estate planning, and they can come help on someone else's client. And we have someone who's an expert in tax, and they can help. Where you're bringing in people from the firm that have specific knowledge that maybe you as an advisor don't have. And then there's times where the advisor's talking to a client, and the client really wants to do a deep dive in the markets, and so they'll bring in myself or Josh or Barry or Michael, and we can kind of talk on that. So I think having that ensemble approach where you have people who are experts in different fields, I think that helps the clients realize too that it's not just me and this advisor one-on-one, even though they're my main point of contact. It's this, I have this whole firm behind me. Yeah. And I think that helps people, especially when they're trying to trust you with their life savings, that they know that it's not just if this person gets hit by a bus tomorrow, my advisor, I'm still going to be okay because I have the rest of this firm backing me, and these people know what they're doing in other aspects of my financial life. So I think that ensemble approach has really been beneficial to us, and it's something that we've slowly had to build up to as we've grown, where we've added more people and realized, okay, if we're going to go to the next step, clients are going to want this, and we'll kind of ask clients, and sometimes it's clients coming to us, but we realize that we need to have expertise in all these different areas if clients are going to stick with us for the long term.
Yeah, and so did you guys have to rethink compensation models then? Because you mentioned the eat what you kill. I know that's still the predominant structure in the industry. I personally think it's has to die if we're going to succeed as an industry.
We did a few years ago have to kind of come up. We even brought in some outside consulting firms to help understand, but we did kind of rework that whole thing. So there's obviously some individual incentives for doing okay, but there's also kind of a pool for the whole team. Yep. And as things grow, the whole firm grows, the pool grows for everyone. So that was something that we have had to, and it's something that you don't think about with growth. It's kind of a good problem to have, but those are still things that you have to work through as a firm. Yeah,
no, that's great. All right, so I told you it was a two-part question, but your answer to the first part about being a lifelong learner sparked maybe a third part of the question. Favorite book or blogger or podcaster that you recommend to people on a regular basis, and you would say, if you haven't read this, you should go out and read it?
Well, I'd like to tell people, especially in the markets, like I started out with reading all market history books and all this stuff on Warren Buffett and Benjamin Graham. I find it's helpful to read beyond just finance, and so read in areas of psychology and human nature, and some of these other books and topics that this gets back to like content, where you can use these analogies and these other studies and research in your own work and kind of bring it back into finance. So I think reading outside of that finance field is very helpful to make you a little more well-rounded, and I find that stuff interests me a lot more these days than even just the investing stuff, where you're reading outside of the field, and then you can figure out ways to tie it back into investing.
Yeah, and use it to teach. favorite book or a recent book you've read that you thought was phenomenal? That's out, maybe even outside of the financial field.
Okay, so I've had a few. We talked. I'm 40, but I had a friend who came late into the game from college who just had his kid, and Michael Lewis actually wrote a book on fatherhood called Home Game, and I said, and it's him. He documented his 2 daughters from when they were born until they were age 5 or 6, which is kind of in the range of my kids now. And it was just his whole thing about the ridiculousness of being a parent and how crazy it can be with toddlers and all the weird stuff you go through. And I told him, read this book, and it gives you a pretty good window into what it's like to be a parent with a
Home Game by Michael Lewis.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to check that out.
One of his books that not as popular as the other ones, but if you're a parent, you'll get a lot of laughs out of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've loved this conversation. We could go on for hours, but I'll give you the kind of the closing word. Any parting advice or comments that you want to leave us with today? Yeah, no,
I appreciate you having me. I think it is as you said, it's kind of cool that we can have these discussions in wealth management now and try to help people. And I always find being a fly on the wall for some of these conversations helpful myself. So hopefully we've helped some people.
Yeah, awesome. Best way to learn more about you, is it to send people to your blog, A Wealth of Common Sense, or is it to go to Ritholtz? What's the best way for people?
wealthofcommonsense.com is the blog. You can find all my stuff there.
Yep, and you got your links out to your Animal Spirits podcast. I've seen it. It's really awesome. So for everybody listening, I hope you've enjoyed this Future of Advice podcast. Again, Ron Bullis, the CEO and founder of Lifeworks Advisors, here with Ben Carlson, the Director of Institutional Asset Management for Ritholtz Wealth Management. If you want to learn more about them, or if you want to have a sense for what to potentially aspire to in terms of content creation and delivering real value to your clients, I would definitely go and follow Josh, Barry, Michael, Ben. You can find them through Twitter, LinkedIn, their blogs. We've learned a lot over the last couple of years from watching what these guys do, and appreciate you sharing, Ben, your insights, your story, and your experience. So thank you.
Great, thanks.